Okay, awesome. So today we're going to dive into a hopefully short Zoom tutorial, but there are some features I want to show you guys, and then I have some questions that were asked on Facebook in my group that I want to address as well towards the end. So hopefully this Zoom tutorial is going to really dive into what typically service-based dog business owners are going to need. So that includes dog trainers, anybody else that's going to be working with people and their animals virtually online, and with the use of Zoom. So let's dive in. So this is the inside of the settings for Zoom in the browser menu. They have settings in their application as well as online. So if you need more, default settings that will address, multiple videos going forward, you want to make sure that you are logged in online and go to, account and go to your settings tab here. So the first part I want to go through is the settings and the meeting settings specifically. So in here you've got lots of really, really great settings that you want to take a look at before you start hosting lessons, classes, recording calls, anything like that. So one of the first settings is whether or not you want your video to be visible when you first get started on a call. You want to see if you want to toggle that on or off. Some people just have that always on. Some people, would rather wait until they're ready to be seen and toggle that on manually when they're ready. That's totally a personal preference, and that's up to you. The next setting here is whether or not you want to see your participants' videos on when they join the call immediately or not. Again, this is a setting that somebody can change, to their liking when they hop on. But this is something you want to consider, whether you want that to be the default on or default off is totally up to you. Typically, you probably want to have the setting to be on because you want to see your students right off the bat, and you don't necessarily want them fumbling around to see how to turn their video on if it's not already on. The next option is audio type. So typically I recommend that you have people use their computer to view the video, but if their computer doesn't have good audio or they're having issues with their computer's audio and you can't hear them, I would always enable the telephone feature so they can call in from their cell phone to a phone number for the Zoom meeting, but then they can still view the video on their computer if they're having issues with their audio on their computer, so that's really nice. So I usually leave this as both options available. Another thing you want to look at is whether or not you allow your participants to join before the meeting starts. Again, personal preference depending on how you run your videos. Let's see, typically you probably have this off because you probably don't necessarily want everybody chit-chatting before the call starts, but you can have that on, like if you're trying to mimic a very physical classroom where people are actually in there chit-chatting before the class starts, you certainly could have that on, but typically that's not fairly super common with virtual calls. Let's see what else. These are, so when you sign up for Zoom, you have a personal meeting ID, and this is a number that's assigned to you, but it's totally up to you whether or not you use it. What I recommend is you actually toggle this off when scheduling a meeting. What you don't want is people able to join a meeting that's already in session, and kind of jumping in the middle of a call with another client or another class. So you want to typically have a different meeting ID for each scheduled call. So that's something that you might want to consider. So if this isn't toggled off, then you may be having people join in before you're done with the previous meeting. If you're using just your personal ID for all your calls, then people can kind of jump in whenever. Now there's a feature you can use called the waiting room. Let's see, it's further down the page here, we'll get to that in a minute, where you have to, physically like click people to let them join the meeting. So that's also an option. I typically don't, require anybody to be authenticated to join my calls. That just kind of adds a layer of complexity to joining the virtual calls. I typically don't require a password in scheduled meetings. We'll just go ahead and turn that off. And these are settings, many of these settings are things that you can set for each individual meeting you schedule as well. These are kind of just the default settings you want everything to start out with. But if you have a specific meeting that you want different settings for, you can tweak it when you're scheduling that particular call. So I don't require passwords. Let's see. You can certainly, if you do require passwords for any reason, you can use a one-click join link to include the password, just to make it as easy as possible for people to join. No passwords typically required for joining by phone. Again, the harder you make it for people to join, the more frustrating it's going to be. I recommend that you automatically mute all participants when they join the meeting, because people may still be kind of shuffling around, getting settled, and you don't want everybody to hear that in their speakers. It can be quite distracting, especially if somebody joins late or anything like that. So I would typically have this mute participants upon entry setting toggled on. Let's see. Meeting reminders, that's up to you. That's just going to give you a notification of whether you have a meeting coming up or not. I typically use Google Calendar for all of my appointments and meetings, so I'll just copy and paste the Zoom meeting information into my Google Calendar invite so that everything's out of Google Calendar. I don't use Zoom as my calendar. Further down in the basics setting, you can decide whether people are able to chat, whether they're able to chat one-on-one separately outside the group during a call. I have it set to save chats because there may be links or conversations that I want to reference in the future for additional content ideas and whatnot. You can either play a sound or not when people join. I recommend to not set this up because it would be quite distracting if somebody accidentally, their signal drops in the middle of the call and they rejoin, then you'll have that ding go off in the middle of the call, which can be distracting. Let's see. You can enable polling here so that, if you want to set up questions for people to answer during your calls, you can set that up before your call or during your call. I'll demonstrate that in a minute. I typically always show the meeting toolbar because I don't want to go digging around for it if I'm sharing my screen. As far as screen sharing goes, that's totally up to you whether you want to enable other participants to do so as well or just have that capability. It certainly is not, unless somebody maybe wants to share a video of their, dog doing something, then typically your students won't be sharing their screens very often. Let's see. You can enable the whiteboard feature, which I'll demonstrate in a little bit. Let's see. So in your advanced settings, you can toggle on the breakout room setting, which is pretty neat. I'll demonstrate that in a minute. This is where it'll, if you have a group of 10 or more people, then it kind of gets crowded and not everybody's allowed or able to hear each other if you're all talking at the same time. So a breakout room allows people to kind of segment people out into different groups to have breakout brainstorming session or whatever, just to allow people to communicate in smaller groups if you have a large audience. Pretty neat feature. Let's see, virtual backgrounds. You want to make sure you have that enabled in your settings, because if you have a messy background or you just don't want people to be looking behind you for any reason, this will basically mimic a green screen, so it'll put a virtual background behind you, which I can demonstrate in a minute. Also another great feature of Zoom. I typically don't use the waiting room feature, but if you want to, strictly monitor who's coming in and out of your virtual conference call, you can enable this feature to, allow people in on your terms. Since I use a different meeting ID for each call that I have scheduled, this isn't something that I need very often or ever. So something to consider. Oh, I don't use it because if somebody drops in the middle of the call because of a bad signal or their internet cuts out for some reason, then it's quite annoying or challenging to remember to let them back into the meeting if they call in from another phone or whatnot. So it's just another thing to do. And if you're presenting in the middle of a call, you don't want to deal with continuing to accept people into the call that are late or have dropped and need to rejoin. Typically, you want to offer the ability to join from your browser. You don't necessarily have to have people download the app to their phone or their computer ahead of time. This particular feature allows them to just join from Google Chrome or from Microsoft Edge or Firefox, so that they don't have to download the app in order to participate and view the call. Email notifications, these are simply just your preferences as usual for any application. All right. So hopefully that was helpful. Now we're going to dive into the recording settings. So if you have the free version of Zoom, you're able to download the recordings from your calls to your computer. So make sure you're being organized about that and you are saving your files in a specific place. And I'll show you how that works in a minute. If you have a paid version of Zoom, you're going to be enabled to record to the cloud if you prefer. This is a little bit easier and nicer if you have limited local storage on your computer. And again, up to you how you want to record. Whether you want to record, the active speaker or the gallery view, which I'll show you what that looks like, but just keep that in mind. Those are really your preferences. Typically, I just record the active speaker because that's the only person that really needs to be watched at the time of the recording. Let's see. You can turn on automatic recording. So if you want to record every meeting, you can just set this to be on so that it records every meeting automatically. Again, for each meeting, you can make their specific settings, but in general, if you want that default to be on, you can set that there. Okay. All right, I think that's it for this one. Telephone settings. If you're taking, international calls, you might want to toggle this on. I believe it's on by default, but I turned it off so that my email invite information was quite a bit shorter. And then on the left here, there's some other options which I have yet to even dive into. One of the common questions I get is, what's the difference between a meeting and a webinar, like a group meeting or a webinar? And the difference is whether or not you can see the participants other than the presenter. A webinar feature is an additional cost for Zoom. So I believe it's an extra $40 a month as of the time of this recording. But it basically allows you to run like a formal presentation. You can't see anybody else. It's just you presenting your screen or yourself. There's a chat feature as well as a formal Q&A feature where people can submit questions and you can answer them. So it's a little bit more of like a formal one-way presentation, whereas the meetings that you're more likely to have with students, in a class type setting, it's a two-way conversation where you have the teacher, you also see the students participating with the teacher as well as with each other potentially. Okay. All right, so next, real quick, I want to cover the different plans that are available. This is just on their plans and pricing page. You can host up to 100 participants, unlimited one-to-one meetings. So for private lessons, this is pretty neat. There's no limits on those. If you have more than 2 people in the meeting, then your limit for the free version is a 40-minute call. There's other features here. So we talked about the virtual background, local recordings for the free version. What else? Breakout rooms are free. And the whiteboard is free as well. So lots of really great features that are available in the free version. Now, some of the reasons you might want to upgrade are limited storage. So you want to store more of the recordings in the cloud automatically. You may need the webinar features if you're doing a formal presentation, so you can present like that. You want to have group calls that are more than 40 minutes long. For most classes, they're typically more than 40 minutes long. Yeah, those are probably the main reasons you would want to upgrade. All right. Okay, so now I want to show you what Zoom looks like. This is the application on the desktop, and many of the features are available here in the settings tab. If you click the little gear icon in the right corner, you can edit your video, audio, chat settings. Here's the virtual background. So if you're teaching and you don't want people to see the background because it's messy or something, you can use some of their default settings. So here's a grass setting. Here's the bridge. This is my current preference because it looks kind of like an office, so it looks a little bit more formal. But you can also just do a plain white background. It's a little bit harsh on the eyes, but you can just basically use any photo that you have or can find or prefer and have that as your background. You can tell it's not perfect because you can kind of see the space in between my fingers and stuff like that when I move a little bit as well. But pretty neat if you want to kind of hide a little bit of your room. All kinds of good features. So just kind of dive in, and many of those features are things that we've already covered that are available to set up in the browser menu. So I have a reminder here to let me know about meetings on my desktop 5 minutes before they start. What else? Yeah, nothing too fancy. So to schedule a meeting from the app on your desktop, which you can also do from the browser as well, you can go to schedule a meeting and then it pulls up the settings here. But you can also do it from the application. So again, this kind of gives you an example of what that looks like. You can set up a recurring meeting as well. I don't typically require the meeting password. I always allow it to generate an automatic new meeting ID here. That's really important. I never use the personal meeting ID because anybody can. If I use that for every call, then anybody could join somebody else's call while it was in session. So because I don't use the waiting room feature. I usually have my videos set to be on. You can require participants to have their videos on right off the bat. These settings are things that they can adjust for themselves once they're in the call as well. So if you don't want people to have their videos on, you might want to preemptively let them know that. Say, in this class, like this is if you're doing a webinar without the webinar add-on, you probably don't want people showing their faces. So you would just let them know to not turn on their camera and to mute themselves. Let's see. Then enable join before host. That's typically fine for me in my preferences, and mute participants upon entry so there's a little bit less noise as well. And then here you can decide whether or not to record the meeting automatically, locally, or in the cloud. And then you would just hit schedule. And what happens is it pulls up the meeting information once you do that. and then you can copy and paste that into your Google Calendar event or your Outlook event, whatever you have. What else? I think that's it for these particular settings. Now I want to show you what a meeting actually looks like. Hello. There's a couple of different views I want to show off. This is the gallery view, so you can see everybody in the meeting, and I've called in on my phone so that you can see another person in here. This is the speaker view, so let's see, and then you can always pin a video. So if you want one speaker like yourself to be the main video, especially during a recording, then you would probably pin that particular video. And then you can hide yourself so you can see other people talking and not yourself. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Some other features in here. So obviously on the left here, you can mute and unmute yourself. You can turn your camera off, turn it back on with this particular button. You can, from here in the video settings, you can click choose a virtual background. Let's see, I'm just going to pin myself there because I'm talking right now. You can make sure to select, the right webcam if you need to. I would always recommend to have all of your webcam and your audio, like if you have anything separate outside of your laptop, which I always recommend a separate microphone, either a Bluetooth headset with a mic or like this, my Apple earbuds with a mic, to have that plugged in before you start Zoom so that it automatically picks that up, so that you don't have to go in and edit these settings immediately. But if it doesn't pick up those settings immediately or automatically, you can just click this little arrow once you're in the meeting and adjust your audio settings here. Same for the video. And you can also, this is where you would choose the virtual background. So if you're having a situation where somebody can't join the meeting, can't find the link, it's easy. You just click this little invite button and have them. You can either copy the URL. Let me show this on this screen here. You can either copy the URL or copy the full invitation for them to join. So you can quickly send that over in an email or a chat message. What else? You can set up polls. So I don't typically do polls, but if you want to, regularly ask questions in your calls, you can set these up during your call or prior to the call so that those are readily available. Let's see. You can share your screen. You also, from this particular setting, you can use the whiteboard feature, which is pretty nice. Some people use a whiteboard to help with their instruction. And so this is kind of what it looks like. So like, number one, you can maybe make some notes here to help your students visualize the material. All right. Pretty simple. Some pretty basic settings there. What else? Yeah, those are probably all the ones you would need. There's also the chat feature, so you can click this and let people talk to each other. You can message others in the meeting privately, or you can message everybody with this particular setting drop down. Here's the recording settings, so you can record to the cloud. Since I have a paid account, I can record to the cloud, and then it sends me the link once the recording is done. And then I can just share that link with others, or I can record to this particular computer. It depends on if you have the space on your computer to do so. And then Breakout Sessions is pretty neat. It'll automatically sort, say you have a group of 10 or more people. It's hard to really get a good conversation going. So if you want to break people up into, groups of 3 or 4 so that they can kind of converse and break out into a conversation, this is a great way to do that. And it'll automatically sort, or you can manually sort people into their own rooms, virtual rooms. Okay, again, another free feature. Let's see. All right, I think those are all the things I wanted to cover. And so now we're going to dive into some of the questions. We talked about the sound settings. One of the things you want to do when you're recording is make sure that you have the proper folder picked. So an example of this is, we'll just do a quick recording. We will end the meeting. And what it will do is process the recording, and then this is where you'll want to select the folder to put that into, okay? It will also save your whiteboard notes, which is pretty neat. Let's see, how many people can you add to a meeting in the free version of Zoom? I believe we were just looking at that. So it's up to 100 participants, and then any more than 2 people, and you would be limited to the 40-minute group calls with the free version. Can we link pre-recorded videos in Zoom or to Zoom? Not necessarily, but what you can and should do would be, share your screen, and let's see, then you can really show the video that you want to show, which is pretty simple in my opinion. Let's see what other questions we had here. And that goes the same with whether you want to share your own video or YouTube videos. It really doesn't matter. Think about what's going to give the best results. I think that sharing YouTube videos is appropriate, given that you're going to give credit. It's, in my opinion, the same as sharing a link to that particular YouTube video. Of course, people are working with you in particular so that you can help them troubleshoot issues, and so just make sure to give credit, but and make sure that that's not the only thing you're doing during a call. Make sure that you're providing your own value as well. Let's see. If you're unable to see the share screen option, make sure you go into your default settings, in the browser, so that you're making sure that setting is turned on so that you're able to do that. Talked about the waitlist already. Talked about common issues with audio. Is there a way to test your setup by yourself? Absolutely. So you would go in and start the meeting, hit record, have it, try, do some testing, talking, test video, and close that meeting, and then save the recording and view the recording and make sure your audio sounds okay. You can also do what I did and just kind of call in from your phone in addition to your computer. So technically, I called in with the same profile, but it allowed me to join with both devices, which was nice. So that's another way you can kind of have a mock meeting, okay? And if you have something like a Chromebook where you don't have a lot of hard drive storage, I would really recommend that you upgrade to the paid Zoom meeting option, where you can store your recordings online in the cloud automatically, because you have to. You don't have any hard drive space. So that's something to think about. It's only $15 a month, so just make sure you include that in your typical pricing. What else here? Can you record Facebook video chats? Was one of the questions. Not exactly Zoom related, but there are other software programs like the one I'm currently using to record this tutorial called OBS, literally the letter OBS, and that allows you. It's a free program. and that allows you to record your audio and your video, whatever's on your computer screen. But just keep in mind that it's going to be a little bit more technical because it's a free software, so it's much more, customizable to people that are a little bit more tech savvy. Zoom makes it super duper easy. All right. So I hope this was helpful. Let me know how it helped you. Let me know how you're using Zoom in your dog business. I'd be real curious to hear. Thanks for listening.